Helped by that iconic Sega Does What Ninten Don't ad campaign, the Sega Genesis was able to penetrate the US market that was dominated by Nintendo. The 16-bit console launched iconic series still active today and is home to plenty of great games. But if you were like me, you probably didn't give the Genesis too much attention outside of Sonic and a handful of games. And now games that you probably weren't aware of as a kid are north of $100. Prices have calmed down a bit, but I have a feeling that they'll stay this way for a long time. Welcome to Retronomics, the series that follows price trends in video games, and today we're talking about the Sega Genesis, the 16-bit console that kicked off the console wars with Nintendo. Today we have Genesis games on the Nintendo Switch. Wild times. The Sega Genesis has aged wonderfully, but that means that it's still in demand, and like most complete in-box copies for systems, they're gonna cost you an arm and a leg. Good news is that prices have calmed down. The bad news is that the bottom is far from being reached. And in this video, I'm forecasting 25 complete in-box North America Sega Genesis games. I get all of my pricing from PriceCharting.com and also check eBay sold listings and availability to determine if the prices will go up, down, or stay the same. If you like this type of content, consider subscribing for more and let me know down below if there's a Sega Genesis game I didn't mention here, and I'll reply back with a forecast. Before we get into some game forecasting for the individual games, let's look into some overall stats. Out of the 25 games that I forecasted, here are the top 5 most expensive games according to their current prices. Crusader of Centy, M.U.S.H.A, 3 Ninjas Kick Back, Splatterhouse 3, and Ristar. I also recorded the peak price overall, and here are the top 5 that were the most expensive at their peak. Crusader of Centy, M.U.S.H.A, Splatterhouse 3, 3 Ninjas Kick Back, and Phantasy Star IV. So you can see, not a lot has changed. 4 out of the 5 games are on the list that I did previously, and I also compared the prices that were prior to the pandemic and today, and here are the top 5 that increased the most. Crusader of Centy, M.U.S.H.A, 3 Ninjas Kick Back, Splatterhouse 3, and Phantasy Star IV. Same 5 games as before, but in different order, but I don't really think that it's really surprising because most of the expensive games prior to the pandemic are also the most expensive games today, with the exception of 3 Ninjas Kick Back, which was the 14th most expensive game in January of 2020. You don't really see something super expensive suddenly lose value, at least with video games. Everything kinda gets inflated with certain games that were once undervalued suddenly spike in value, and that's apparent with 3 Ninjas Kick Back, which increased 322% since January of 2020 and actually increased in the past 6 months. I am experimenting with some of these stats, so if there is something that you want to see that I didn't touch on, let me know in those comments down below. And now, let's get into forecasting the 25 Sega Genesis games. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist has been regarded as the lesser 16-bit Turtles arcade beat-em-up, and mainly because it's different than Turtles in Time because Nintendo still had that bogus exclusive agreement. But the Genesis market share made Konami realize that it was worth the effort to make a similar but different game. Nowadays, the Hyperstone Heist has seen appreciation, and because of that, the complete copy has fetched a high dollar amount for years, but has doubled in value in the past too. The Cowabunga collection might help slow down the price, but compilations don't seem to have the same impact on price as they used to, even if it's a physical copy. Expect the price of this game to remain around PriceCharting's price for the foreseeable future. Jam Earl hasn't been affected too much by the pandemic. It did have some spikes up to $75, but it's more or less the price that it was before the pandemic started. This is a unique game as it does change itself up each time you play, making the replayability pretty appealing. I would buy it now and have no regrets that the price will plummet out of nowhere in the next couple of months, but there aren't a lot available on eBay, so it might slowly climb in price, especially if condition is important to you. Rocket Knight Adventures was Konami's attempt at an animal mascot game, and this time with a possum. This game is gorgeous, and since it lived in the shadow of Sonic the Hedgehog at the time, it is now one of the more expensive games, and it's currently not available on modern platforms. It's missing from the Genesis Mini as well, so it probably would be a good idea to buy it now, as there are still plenty of copies in great condition available on eBay for a reasonable price. Contra Hardcore is available on the Sega Genesis Mini and the Nintendo Switch Online, but like Hyperstone Heist, the price has remained unaffected by those re-releases. Although it hasn't exploded in value like Hyperstone Heist, expect the price of Contra Hardcore to remain expensive for the foreseeable future, especially when you look at eBay and notice that there are a lot of copies available, but without the manual. So it is probably a good idea to find a copy that you want and snag it now, because I have a feeling good condition complete copies are going to be hard to find in the future. Speaking of hard to find, Castlevania Bloodlines remains one of the most expensive Castlevania games, mainly because of the reputation of the Super Nintendo at the time. Nowadays, people know that this is a quality game, even if it might not be your exact cup of tea compared to the Metroidvania style games. Just like Hyperstone Heist, Bloodlines has doubled in value since the start of the pandemic. Even with modern collections having it, the price will remain high, so I would consider buying a copy now rather than later. If you can find a decent copy with the manual, that is. Mutant League Hockey is built on EA's NHL engine, but it has quirky mechanics. Some arenas have holes in the ice that you can fall through, and the rules are a bit more lax for crazy hits. Price charting shows that the price has dipped, but a couple of copies in terrible condition sold for like $50 or so expect to pay over $140 for an acceptable copy. Maybe you'll get lucky, as I've noticed that there have been more and more open bid listings on eBay lately, which allows the market to decide what things are actually worth, so I suggest keeping an eye out for a copy and make it a priority. Would you believe that a brand tie-in game would be one of the more expensive titles for the Sega Genesis? McDonald's Treasureland Adventure is climbing in value mainly because it's obscure, and it's a surprisingly good game for the Sega Genesis despite it being a commercial for a fast food restaurant. Expect the price of this game to rise in the next 6 months because a lot of copies without the manual are flooding eBay, and the ones that are truly complete are listed for a premium. I also don't expect this game to get a re-release ever, considering the current health-conscious climate. It's just not easy for fast food to advertise to kids nowadays without some backlash. Wonder Boy in Monster World is not a game that I'm really familiar with, and it doesn't look like a lot of other people realize it either. And by that I mean that compared to the more popular titles, the price is subjective of course, but I would wager a lot of people would consider this expensive. Good thing is that it is one title being affected by the re-release of the compilation that's on the PlayStation 4 and Switch, and it's on the Genesis Mini if you manage to get one of those. I would expect this game to remain under $100 for the foreseeable future, unless there's a new Wonder Boy game in the next year or so. It's that time in the video where I mentioned the Atlas game. Crusader of Centy is an action-adventure game that's been over $100 for at least a decade, and the pandemic ensured that this game will probably never drop below $1,500. This is considered a grail of the Genesis, and I don't really think that the Genesis 2 Mini is going to put a dent in the price of this game. If you don't miss the manual, you can get it for a bit less, but if this is one that you're going to spend a lot of money on, you want everything included. Michael Jackson's Moonwalker will never be re-released given how Sonic 3's re-release was handled with the soundtrack replaced. This game is based on a music movie that Michael did in the 80s, and after he passed away the game became sought after. The pandemic just exacerbated that notoriety, and now it's kind of expensive for how mediocre this game is compared to the rest of the games on this list. Expect the price to remain high, as most listed on eBay are, of course, missing the manual, priming people to spend more for a complete copy. Okay, I've talked about some expensive games, so how about a cheap one? Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is one of the best-selling Genesis games, and it's my favorite Sonic out of the Genesis games. It only just made it over $20 this past May, but it's on everything, and it's been on everything for a long time. Honestly, if you are collecting Genesis games and you haven't accidentally found this one in a bundle, I would buy it now so that way you can enjoy a great game while you save up for the rest of these on this list. Three Ninjas Kick Back is based on a movie, so why is it so expensive? Well, Three Ninjas Kick Back for the Super Nintendo has been one of the more expensive games for the longest time, and it's mainly because cardboard doesn't last as long as plastic clamshells, and now it looks like the Genesis's price is a direct result of people assuming that it's just as rare as a complete Super Nintendo copy. And it doesn't look like it is based on price charting because there was way more sales for the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo, but good luck trying to find this complete for less than $100, which is a shame because it hadn't moved in price for years and it's only been spiking in the past 6 months. Ristar is a game that I mentioned in my Sega Game Gear Retronomics video, and it's a game that's beloved by many, and now it's crazy expensive for a complete copy despite being re-released on the Genesis Mini 2. There aren't many copies out there on eBay, so I would wager that the price will remain high for the foreseeable future, so maybe keep an eye out and snag it if you really want that game. Truxton is a great shooter for the Sega Genesis as it's part of the top-line collection of shooters, so it will be pretty pricey, but not as much as other shooters for the Sega Genesis. This, along with 3 other games, was re-released for play on the Sega Genesis, and oddly enough, the reprint is as much as the original now, or at least pretty close. Considering the popularity of these shooters, Truxton is fairly reasonable priced. I would feel comfortable buying this now as the price has dropped and now looks like it's settled. Splatterhouse 3 is naturally part of the Splatterhouse series, and it's been more or less defunct save for a couple of re-releases. The series has a cult following, and as a result, Splatterhouse 3 has been fairly expensive for as long as price charting has been tracking prices. I don't really expect the price to drop anytime soon. Namco has been rolled into Bandai, and while they do seem to want to release certain games, Splatterhouse 3 remains absent. But not to sound like a broken record here, even if Namco decides to release a Splatterhouse compilation or whatever, it's very unlikely that we'll see a price drop for the original cart. I really wish more companies would re-release games for the original system that they launched on. I feel like they'd be making a ton of money if they were to do that. Next up is Maddon Football. Yes, a sports game that used to be fairly inexpensive because they've been releasing these games for the past 30 years or so. After John Maddon passed away in December of 2021, the first title skyrocketed in value, fetching almost $140 in February. Nowadays, it's at a reasonable price, but much higher than what it used to go for. I honestly don't hear anyone talk about how great this version is, so if you like Maddon, maybe wait a bit to see if the price will go down a little bit further, or snag it before December and flip it for that resurgence in interest when they remember him for the next Super Bowl. Crue Ball is a pinball game based off of Motley Crue, and it really encapsulates what kind of aesthetic the Genesis was going for back in the day. It appeals to an older audience, and it's got that late 80s, early 90s metal aesthetic. And it's not too expensive compared to other games on this list. Not really a lot to say about this game, but I would imagine that it's more uncommon when it comes to tracking down a decent copy that comes with all the goodies like a poster and the stickers. So maybe buy this one now rather than later. Zombies Ate My Neighbors isn't as popular as the Super Nintendo title, mainly because of some of the limitations in gameplay, but it is still a cool game, and if you were eyeing the Super Nintendo title and thought that it was too expensive, then the Sega Genesis version might fit your budget. This might have been a title benefiting from the re-release on modern platforms, but I think most people saw this as a hidden gem, and then the people who were already interested in the game have theirs, so the price remains steady. Good time to buy it now before the spooky season starts. Speaking of spooky season, Ghostbusters for the Sega Genesis is one of the few good Ghostbuster games during that era before the 3D one with the original actors came to market. This game has a chibi art style of 3 of the 4 Ghostbusters, and it's a platforming adventure that at least somewhat resembles the movie, and as such, it is an expensive game, and like most movie tie-in stuff, you're probably never going to see a re-release of this game on modern platforms, since Sony would really like to leave the legacy behind and build a new series that they can milk forever. Keep an eye out for a good condition copy, because it is likely that the price will continue to steadily rise, but not as much as it did in the past 2 years. Adventures of Batman and Robin is similar to Three Ninjas Kick Back, where the Super Nintendo version has been sought after forever, and as a result, the Genesis version has also seen an increase in price. Again, not as much as the Super Nintendo version, but it is still pricey. They are pretty similar to each other, so I can kind of see why the price would increase on the Genesis version. Also, this one comes in those crappy cardboard boxes that Sega switched to late in the cycle, so a good condition copy are going to be hard to find in the next couple of years. So I would suggest making this a priority if you're going for a complete minty set. Landstalker Treasures of King Noel is a pretty interesting action RPG for the Sega Genesis, and it is in a long line of relative titles, including its spiritual successor Alundra for the PlayStation by Working Designs. As lineage of this game gets put together, prices tend to go up across the board, and having played it, it's not as intuitive as Alundra, but it is pretty unique for the Sega Genesis. It's on the Sega Genesis Mini, but the current price won't last, as again, a lot of copies without manuals are making the ones with manuals a bit more alluring to pay that premium. Outrun is a port of a popular Sega arcade game, and it's a fairly good one, but not the most accurate port. That still doesn't stop it from climbing in value, and it's kind of interesting to see the price climb on this version, as it doesn't appear to be any reason for it. It's not like the game is rare or the game has been re-released on multiple platforms, or even if it's the best port, but hey, game collecting in current year hasn't made much sense anyway. I personally would wait to see if the price drops a bit, but given current listings on eBay that are complete with the manual listed for over $100, I think it will be a while, if at all, so it's up to you. M.U.S.H.A is the second most expensive Genesis game that got a retail release. It's a shoot 'em up, and retro shoot 'em ups are expensive. It is available on the Nintendo Switch Online service, so if you were curious about it without dropping a ton of money, you can do that, but I do think that it's pretty safe to say that this game will remain expensive for the foreseeable future. An open bid M.U.S.H.A did go for $750, and there was another open bid for $450, so maybe hope is not all lost. Still, it's pretty pricey for just one game, but I guess if you had to buy one expensive game, M.U.S.H.A wouldn't be the worst decision. Streets of Rage is a popular beat-em-up series, and the third entry for the Sega Genesis is the most expensive by far. There's a lot of debate on how good this game is, but when I mentioned in my Castlevania video last year, it does appear that the last game in the series on the platform is the most expensive. Usually it's due to diminishing returns on game interest, and while this game has been pricey for years, this might now be out of reach for casual collectors. The good news is that the price has more or less evened out and probably won't spike anytime soon. Phantasy Star IV is the last game on this list, and it's expensive. Are you surprised? The RPGs for Genesis were uncommon, but this series is beloved by many, and RPGs generally run a bit higher anyway, so it's a perfect storm, especially when it's the last in the series for the Genesis and late in life at that. Expect the price of this game to remain high, as it did come in a cardboard box, so condition for complete copies are going to be hard to come by, so I suggest making this a priority, or if you want, just get a reprinted clamshell for significantly less money. So there you go, 25 Sega Genesis games forecasted, and as you can see, while the prices are higher than they were 2 years ago, they are increasing at a slower rate, and in fact, half of the games that I forecasted are cheaper than they were at the beginning of 2022. And the one game that increased the most, 3 Ninjas Kick Back, which increased more than $100, is the most that increased overall, with the next just being $31.26 with Castlevania Bloodlines. But prices are still high, and they probably won't drop to pre-pandemic levels as a collective, but I do think that you'll see games that weren't the most expensive at the beginning of the pandemic fall in price, with a couple of outliers, like 3 Ninjas Kick Back. Again, that game spiked recently, and I don't think that it'll come back down for at least 2 years, if at all. So that's going to do it for this episode of Retronomics. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. It really is the best way to support the channel. If you're new here, consider subscribing for more content. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at SNICTendo. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Super Nintendo, and I'll see you next time.